3 months into my marriage, my mother-in-law slid a manila folder across my marble kitchen island and smiled. "Your apartment is family property," she announced to the entire Thanksgiving dinner table. "You must pay $2,000 in rent per month directly to my account." I looked at the lease, then looked at my husband, who sat in complete silence. I smiled back and said, "Then I will just go back to my apartment." My husband turned pale and stammered, "What apartment?" Before I tell you how I dismantled his entire family legacy in 10 minutes, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to in-laws who severely underestimated your worth. I am Zuri. I am 35 years old and the founder of a high-end commercial staging and real estate development firm in Atlanta. We were hosting our very first Thanksgiving as a married couple, and I had spent the last 3 days ensuring every detail of the evening was completely flawless. My custom mahogany dining table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. The air in my penthouse was thick with the rich, warm scents of roasted turkey, candied yams, and collard greens. It was supposed to be a beautiful milestone, a blending of families and a celebration of gratitude. Instead, I found myself pouring an expensive red wine, just trying to survive the suffocating presence of my in-laws. My husband Andre worked as a mid-level bank manager. He was charming, intelligent, and possessed a smooth, easygoing nature that had initially swept me off my feet. But sitting next to him at the head of the table was his mother, Corinne. Corinne was a woman who wore her perceived social status like a heavy suit of armor. Her silk blouse was perfectly pressed, her hair meticulously laid, and her posture rigid with an arrogant sort of pride. From the moment Andre introduced us, Corinne had made it abundantly clear that she tolerated me at best. The dinner conversation had already been a grueling marathon of passive-aggressive jabs and thinly veiled criticisms. I was doing my best to remain a gracious host, smiling through the subtle insults about the seasoning in my dressing and the modern, industrial decor of my home. But then Corinne raised her crystal champagne flute and clinked it with a silver spoon. The gentle ringing sound brought the quiet murmurs around the table to a sudden halt. Everyone turned their attention to the matriarch. I expected a traditional holiday toast, perhaps some performative words about family unity and blessings. Instead, Corinne reached into her designer tote bag, pulled out a thick manila folder, and slid it directly across my custom marble kitchen island until it rested right in front of my plate. I looked down at the folder, then back up at her, waiting for an explanation. Corinne offered a perfectly practiced, patronizing smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "Since you and Andre have been married for 3 months now," she began, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room, "we feel it is time we formalize a few domestic arrangements. You are officially part of this family now, Zuri. And in this family, everyone contributes to the legacy." I opened the folder. Inside was a freshly drafted, legally binding lease agreement. My eyes scanned the crisp black text, stopping on a specific clause highlighted in bold. It demanded $2,000 a month in rent payable directly to Corinne's personal bank account. I blinked, genuinely trying to process the absurdity of what I was reading. "I am sorry," I said, keeping my voice carefully level. "What exactly is this?" Corinne folded her hands neatly on the table. "It is a lease, dear. We all know Andre purchased this luxury penthouse using a significant withdrawal from the family trust fund. Since family money bought this property, it is effectively family property. It is only fair and proper that you begin paying your share to live here. Think of it as your contribution to the estate that houses you." The air in the room grew incredibly heavy. I slowly turned my head to look at Andre. Surely my husband would laugh. Surely he would immediately correct his mother, apologize for her outrageous overstep, and clear up this bizarre misunderstanding. But Andre did not laugh. He did not speak. He did not even look at me. He sat perfectly still, suddenly entirely captivated by the mashed potatoes on his plate, pushing them around with his fork in utter silence. A cold realization washed over me, chilling me down to my bones. Andre was complicit. He had allowed his mother to draft this document. More importantly, he had lied to her. He had lied to his entire family about how this multi-million-dollar penthouse was acquired. He had let them believe he was the sole provider, the wealthy patriarch of our new household, funding our lavish lifestyle with his family's money. He had done it to stroke his own fragile ego, to cover up his insecurities about the fact that his wife made triple his salary. And now he was sitting there, a silent coward, letting me take the fall for his massive deception. Before I could even address my husband's stunning betrayal, Corinne decided to twist the knife. She leaned forward, the patronizing smile fading into something much sharper and far more malicious. She did not just want my money, she wanted to put me in my place. "You should really be thanking us," Corinne said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We are being incredibly generous. We know exactly where you come from, Zuri. We know all about your working-class roots down in the historic West End. It is a testament to Andre's big heart that he looked past all of that. But you have to understand the reality of your situation. You married into a family with a third-generation HBCU legacy. We are active members of Jack and Jill. Our bloodline represents old money and true excellence. We elevated you. We brought a woman with absolutely no real background into a penthouse that we own. The absolute least you can do is pay a modest rent to show your gratitude for the lifestyle we are providing you." Her words were designed to humiliate me, to strip away my dignity in front of the entire gathering. She wanted to highlight the contrast between my gritty, self-made background and their supposed aristocratic pedigree. I grew up in the West End of Atlanta. I was proud of my neighborhood, proud of the resilience and the relentless work ethic it had instilled in me. I had climbed out of poverty through sheer determination, building a commercial empire from scratch. I knew the value of a dollar and the weight of an honest day's work. Corinne, on the other hand, coasted on the illusion of inherited wealth, clutching desperately to social clubs and legacy titles while lacking any real substance. She honestly believed that her social standing gave her the right to charge me rent, to sleep in a home I had bled to build. I looked around the table. Andre's younger brother Terrence sat there, nodding along with his mother, looking at me with a mixture of pity and superiority. Terrence's wife, Chloe, sat beside him, watching the spectacle with keen interest. Chloe was a white woman from an ultra-wealthy Connecticut family who constantly tried far too hard to insert herself into black spaces, wielding her immense privilege like a weapon whenever it suited her. She looked entirely too pleased by my public humiliation. "I am not signing this," I stated calmly, pushing the manila folder back across the marble island. Corinne's eyes narrowed. The polite mask vanished completely, replaced by naked hostility. "You will sign it," she demanded, her tone shifting from patronizing to threatening. "You are a guest in the kingdom my husband built. You will respect the hierarchy of this family. If you refuse to contribute, if you insist on being a financial parasite, then you do not belong here." She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "You will sign that lease tonight, Zuri, or you will pack your cheap bags and be out of this apartment by Monday morning. Do not test me. I have the resources and the connections to make sure you have absolutely nothing." The silence that followed her threat was deafening. The entire table waited with bated breath, fully expecting the poor girl from the West End to surrender. They expected me to cry, to scream, to beg for forgiveness, and submit to their old money intimidation. They thought they held all the power. They thought they owned the ground I was standing on. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I reached out and calmly picked up the lease agreement. I looked directly at Andre, who was sweating profusely, now his eyes darting between me and his mother in sheer panic. "Then I will just go back to my apartment," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. Andre snapped his head up, all the color draining from his face in an instant. He looked absolutely terrified. "What apartment, Zuri?" he stammered, his voice trembling. I let the question hang in the air, allowing the thick, suffocating tension to fill every corner of the room. The absolute shock on his face was a portrait of a man, realizing that his entire house of cards was about to collapse. Andre kept his eyes firmly glued to his plate. He picked up his silver fork and methodically pushed a mound of garlic mashed potatoes from one side of the porcelain rim to the other. He did not say a single word. He did not jump to my defense. He did not turn to his mother and tell her that she was making a catastrophic mistake. His silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket that covered the entire dining room, and it was all the confirmation Corinne needed. She took a slow, victorious sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving my face, reveling in what she thought was my absolute submission. The irony of the moment was so thick, I could practically taste it over the vintage Bordeaux I had poured for them. I looked at the extravagant Thanksgiving spread covering the custom marble island. The perfectly roasted golden turkey, the collard greens simmered for hours, the candied yams bubbling with brown sugar and nutmeg. I had paid for every single ingredient on that table. I had stood in this kitchen since dawn preparing a feast to welcome his family into our marriage. And here sat my mother-in-law drinking the champagne I purchased, eating the food I cooked, sliding a fake lease across my own countertop, and demanding that I pay her for the privilege. She set the crystal flute down with a sharp, echoing clink. You see, Zuri, when Andre first brought you home, I had my reservations. I am a mother who fiercely protects her bloodline, and you must understand exactly how this looked from our perspective. She gestured vaguely in my direction, a sweeping motion of her hand that was meant to wave away my entire existence. A girl from the historic West End of Atlanta, scrappy, I am sure, resourceful perhaps, but fundamentally lacking the refinement, the grace, and the pedigree that comes from generations of careful cultivation. I maintained my composure, my face a neutral mask as she continued to weaponize my upbringing. We are not just anybody, Corinne announced, her voice taking on a theatrical, rehearsed cadence designed for an audience. This family is a Spellman and Morehouse family. We have 3 generations of graduates who have walked those hallowed grounds. We are proud alumni of the Jack and Jill organization. We do not just make money, Zuri. We build generational wealth. We curate excellence. We uphold a rigid standard that you, quite frankly, were never exposed to in your youth. You grew up surviving. We grew up thriving. I slowly shifted my gaze to the man sitting beside me, the man who had held my hands at the altar 90 days ago and promised before God to protect me. Andre took a nervous sip of his ice water, his hand trembling just enough to make the ice cubes rattle against the glass. He was actively shrinking into his custom-tailored suit. In that agonizing stretch of silence, the truth became crystal clear. I had spent my 20s wearing hard hats and steel-toed boots, flipping distressed commercial properties, negotiating with contractors, and building a multi-million-dollar real estate development firm from scratch. Andre had not simply told a white lie to impress his mother. He had actively constructed a false narrative where he was a wealthy savior and I was a charity case. He let his family believe he rescued me from poverty because he was profoundly embarrassed that his wife made triple his salary as a mid-level bank manager. He had sold out my dignity for a pat on the head from his elitist mother. Corinne leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, adopting a toxic tone of faux maternal concern. We opened our doors to you. We allowed a woman with absolutely no real background, no legacy, and no standing in this city to elevate herself by marrying my son. We let you move your cheap things into a luxury penthouse that our family trust provided. We gave you the beautiful illusion of arriving, the absolute least you can do, the bare minimum required to show your gratitude for the lifestyle we are graciously providing you, is to sign that document and pay your share. She reached into her designer tote bag and retrieved a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen, sliding it across the island until it bumped against the manila folder. It is a nominal fee, really, she added dismissively. $2,000 a month is a fraction of what this property commands on the open market. Consider it a late tuition fee for learning how to operate in high society. Sign it, Zuri. I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the fraudulent lease agreement. Then I looked directly into Corinne's cold, calculating eyes. I am not signing this, I stated. My voice did not shake. It was not a plea. It was not a negotiation. It was a simple, immovable fact. The polite, patronizing mask melted off Corinne's face instantly. She looked at me with the kind of absolute disdain reserved for an insect that had crawled onto her fine china. The underlying hostility, the pure, unadulterated elitism she harbored, finally broke through to the surface. She slammed her open palm flat against the marble countertop. "Excuse me," She snapped, her voice losing its measured cadence and pitching upward into a sharp, threatening hiss. You arrogant, ungrateful little girl. You forget exactly who you are dealing with. You are a guest in the kingdom my husband built. You will respect the hierarchy of this family. If you refuse to contribute, if you insist on being a financial parasite feeding off my son's generosity, then you do not belong at this table, and you certainly do not belong in this home. She pushed her chair back and stood up, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face, her chest heaving with indignation. You will pick up that pen and you will sign that lease tonight, Zuri, or I promise you I will have my property manager bring a crew to this building on Monday morning. I will have every cheap piece of clothing you own boxed up and thrown directly onto Peachtree Street. Do not test me. I have the resources and the connections in this city to make sure you walk away from this marriage with absolutely nothing. The silence that followed her threat was absolute. The entire table stopped eating. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They were waiting for me to break. They expected the girl from the West End to lower her head, to cry, to beg for forgiveness, and to submit to their old money intimidation. They thought they held all the power because they truly believed they owned the ground I was standing on. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not even blink. I reached out calmly and picked up the lease agreement. I held the crisp paper in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of their profound ignorance. Then I turned my body, slightly bypassing Corinne entirely, and looked dead into Andre's eyes. I watched him swallow hard, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Then I will just go back to my apartment, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. Andre's head snapped up. The remaining color drained from his face in a violent rush, leaving his skin an ashy, terrified gray. He stared at me, his eyes wide and completely unmoored, the devastating realization hitting him that his carefully constructed lie was imploding in real time. "What apartment, Zuri?" he stammered, his voice cracking on the final syllable. The dining room went dead silent. Before Andre could even attempt to drag air into his lungs to formulate a lie, the sharp, aggressive tapping of acrylic nails against the manila folder shattered the quiet. The tapping came from Chloe. Terrence had married Chloe 2 years ago and brought her down from an ultra-wealthy Connecticut enclave. She was the kind of white woman who constantly tried far too hard to insert herself into black spaces, adopting slang when it suited her socializing, but wielding her generational privilege and racial armor like a loaded weapon the second she felt challenged. She sat across from me, dripping in diamonds she had inherited rather than earned, completely oblivious to the absolute terror radiating from her brother-in-law. Chloe reached across the roasted turkey and tapped the lease agreement again. Her eyes held a sickeningly sweet glint of manufactured sympathy. "Honestly, Zuri, you really should be grateful," she chimed in, her voice loud and grating in the tense dining room. "You are being so defensive when Corinne is just trying to establish some structure. When I married into the family, my father insisted we set up clear boundaries regarding the estates back in Greenwich. It is just how people of a certain caliber do things to protect their assets. You should appreciate that they are letting you stay here at all." I stared at her. The audacity of this woman trying to lecture me about wealth and class in my own dining room was staggering. But Chloe was not finished. She leaned back in her chair and casually swirled her wine, looking around my penthouse as if she were inspecting a hotel room she was about to purchase. "Besides," she continued, waving her free hand dismissively, "Terrence and I are actually moving into the master suite next month anyway." The words hung in the air, suspended over the dinner table like a live grenade. I did not move. I did not breathe. I simply stared at her, trying to comprehend the sheer lunacy of the sentence that had just left her mouth. "You are doing what I asked," my voice a dangerous whisper. Chloe smiled brightly, completely misreading the room and entirely mistaking my shock for confusion. "Corinne promised it to us," she stated, as if her mother-in-law possessed the deed to the entire universe. "You know, Terrence and I are actively trying for a baby now. The master suite here has that incredible floor-to-ceiling glass wall, and it gets the absolute best natural light. It will be absolutely perfect for the nursery and the baby's play area. My interior designer already said the space has great bones. We are bringing him in tomorrow morning to take some measurements and look at paint swatches. She took another sip of her wine, completely unbothered. It is only fair, Zuri, since this is family property and we are the ones officially expanding the bloodline right now. You and Andre can take the guest room down the hall. It is perfectly cozy for two people, and you really do not need all that square footage just for yourselves anyway. It makes perfect sense when you think about it practically. I slowly turned my gaze away from Chloe and looked at Corinne. My mother-in-law was sitting up perfectly straight, a smug, satisfied smile resting on her face. She nodded approvingly at Chloe, validating every single word. Corinne had actually sat down with her white daughter-in-law and planned the hostile takeover of my bedroom. They had actively discussed tearing apart the most intimate space in my home to accommodate a child that did not even exist yet. They had assigned me to the guest quarters in the house I owned. My mind flashed to that master suite. I thought about the imported Italian marble I had personally selected for the ensuite bathroom. I thought about the custom floating vanity I had paid my contractors double to install before my wedding day. I thought about the massive walk-in closet I had designed step by step to hold my professional wardrobe. I thought about the panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline that I woke up to every single morning, a constant reminder of how far I had climbed from the gritty streets of my childhood. And these people, these arrogant, entitled parasites, believed they could simply snap their fingers and claim it as their own, because Corinne declared it family property. But the absolute worst part? The betrayal that burned through my veins like battery acid was sitting right next to me. I turned my eyes to Andre, my husband, the man who had stood before our friends and family 90 days ago and sworn to protect me, to cherish me, to put me above all others. He was staring down at his lap, his hands gripping his napkin so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He was sweating profusely, he was shaking, and he was entirely silent. Andre had known, he had to have known. He allowed his mother to promise the bed we slept in to his younger brother and his entitled sister-in-law. He let them carve up my home like a freshly cooked turkey right in front of my face, and he did not have the spine to tell them the truth. He was so terrified of losing his status as the wealthy, successful son that he was willing to let his family evict his new wife from her own master bedroom and shove her into a guest room just to keep his pathetic lie alive. He was going to let Chloe bring a designer into my private sanctuary to measure my walls. The rage that bloomed inside my chest was cold and calculating. There would be no screaming match. There would be no tears falling into the mashed potatoes. There would be no undignified brawl over the Thanksgiving turkey. I was a businesswoman, and I was about to handle this like a hostile corporate takeover. I stood up. The loud scraping sound of my heavy wooden chair pushing back against the hardwood floor echoed like a gunshot. Chloe jumped slightly, spilling a drop of wine onto her silk dress. Terrence stopped chewing his food. Corinne dropped her smug smile, sensing a shift in the atmosphere that she could not control. I did not say a word to any of them. I walked around the edge of the large dining table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor, until I stood directly behind Andre. He refused to look up at me. He was breathing heavily, paralyzed by his own cowardice. I reached down and grabbed the collar of his expensive custom-tailored shirt. The very same shirt I had purchased for him as an anniversary gift just weeks prior. I twisted the expensive fabric tightly in my fist and hauled him upward with a sudden, forceful jerk. Andre scrambled to his feet, choking slightly as the collar dug into his neck, his chair tipping backward and crashing onto the floor with a deafening clatter. "We are going into the hallway," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a weight that left absolutely no room for debate. "Now." I did not wait for his response. I kept my grip firmly on his collar and dragged my husband of 90 days away from the Thanksgiving table, pulling him toward the long, dimly lit corridor that separated the dining room from the bedrooms, leaving his family sitting in stunned silence behind us. I shoved him backward the moment the heavy oak door of the corridor clicked shut behind us. His back hit the textured wallpaper with a dull thud. The ambient jazz music playing softly from the dining room speakers was completely muffled now, leaving only the sound of Andre breathing heavily. He looked like a cornered animal, All of his smooth, confident charm had evaporated the second we were out of his mother's sight. "Explain it to me right now," I commanded, keeping my voice dangerously low. "I want to know exactly why your mother is sitting at my dining table demanding rent for a property I bought 4 years ago. I want to know why Chloe thinks she is moving into my master bedroom to raise a child that does not exist. And most of all, Andre, I want to know why you sat there and said absolutely nothing." He ran a trembling hand over his face, smudging the careful grooming he had spent an hour perfecting that morning. "Zuri, please," he whispered frantically, glancing back at the closed door, as if he expected Corinne to burst through it at any moment. "You need to lower your voice. They will hear you. Just play along for tonight, please. I will fix it tomorrow." "Play along." I repeated the words, tasting like poison on my tongue. "You want me to sign a fraudulent lease agreement and pay your mother $2,000 a month to live in my own home just to play along?" He took a step toward me, holding his hands up in a placating gesture that only fueled my rage. "It is not about the money," he pleaded. "You know it is not about the money for them. It is about respect. It is about how things look. My mother just needs to feel like she is in control of the family estate. If you just sign the paper, it keeps the peace. You do not even actually have to pay her the full amount every month. We can figure it out." I slapped his hands away. "You are out of your mind if you think I am signing over my dignity to keep Corinne comfortable. Tell me the truth, Andre. What exactly did you tell them?" The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. He looked down at the expensive hardwood floor, avoiding my gaze entirely. The truth began to bleed out of him in a series of frantic, shameful whispers. He told me that when we first started dating, he was intimidated. I was running a highly successful commercial staging and real estate development firm, while he was stuck as a mid-level manager at a retail bank. He said the men in his family were always the providers, the ones who built the wealth. His grandfather had started the family business, his father had expanded it, and his brother Terrence was a senior partner at a law firm. Andre confessed that he simply could not stomach the idea of introducing me to Corinne and admitting that I made triple his salary. He could not stand the thought of his mother looking down on him for moving into a luxury penthouse that was bought and paid for by a woman who grew up in the historic West End. It emasculated him. He needed to play the role of the traditional wealthy provider to maintain his status in his mother's eyes and to keep up with his brother's Connecticut-bred wife. "So, I told them I bought the penthouse." He muttered, his voice barely a scrape against the quiet of the hallway. "I told them I used my portion of the family trust fund payout to secure the mortgage. They think I put the deed in a holding company to protect the family assets." I stared at the man I had married, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of his deception. "You lied to them," I said, my voice trembling with a terrifying kind of clarity. "You let your family believe you were some real estate mogul. You let them believe your trust fund paid for my custom renovations for the marble island your mother just insulted for the roof over our heads." I had to. "Zuri." He insisted, stepping closer, his eyes wide with desperate justification. "You know how my mother is. She values legacy. She values the image of Black excellence. If she knew the truth, she would never respect me. She would look at me like a failure. I did it to protect us. I did it so they would accept you." "Do not, you dare put this on me," I fired back, stepping into his space and forcing him to look at me. "You did not do this to protect me. You did this to protect your fragile ego. You lied to your family to look like a king, and you turned me into your peasant." The puzzle pieces were snapping together with brutal precision. I realized in that moment that Andre's silence at the dinner table was not an act of shock. It was a calculated trap. He knew his mother was going to present that lease. He knew Chloe was going to ask for the master suite. He had walked me directly into an ambush, hoping that the immense social pressure of a formal Thanksgiving dinner would back me into a corner. He genuinely believed that if I was surrounded by his intimidating old money family, I would simply fold. He expected me to sign away my rights and quietly fund his pathetic lie just to avoid causing a scene. "You knew about the lease," I stated, the reality sinking like a stone in my stomach. "You knew Chloe was planning to measure my bedroom." Andre flinched, confirming everything without saying a single word. He reached out and grabbed my hands, his grip tight and frantic. Just pay the 2 grand Zuri, he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. You make enough. Just give her the rent and let Chloe have the master suite for a year until she gets bored and they move back to Connecticut. I will make it up to you, I swear. Don't humiliate me in front of my family. A cold, absolute wave of disgust washed over me, extinguishing whatever lingering affection I had left for the man standing in front of me. He was not a partner. He was a parasite willing to let his mother and sister-in-law strip my home down to the studs just so he could keep playing a role he had not earned. I yanked my hands out of his grasp with such force he stumbled forward. I looked him up and down, taking in the expensive suit I had paid for the gold watch I had gifted him, the entire fraudulent life I had unknowingly subsidized. You humiliated yourself, Andre, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or mercy. I leave Andre leaning heavily against the corridor wall, clutching his expensive collar and gasping for air as his pathetic reality crashes down around him. I do not look back. I smooth down the front of my dress, adjust my posture, and walk back into the dining room with the poise of a woman going into a boardroom to execute a hostile takeover. What greets me is a scene so profoundly disrespectful, it momentarily stops my breath. Chloe has not even waited for the Thanksgiving turkey to be carved. She is up from her chair and standing in the center of my living space. In her hand is a bright yellow steel tape measure. The sharp metallic snap of the tape echoing across the room makes my blood run cold. She is standing at the base of my custom floating staircase. That staircase is my masterpiece. I spent weeks sourcing the reclaimed white oak from a historic Georgia mill and combining it with industrial steel cabling. I engineered the suspension myself, pouring my literal blood and sweat into the design to perfectly bridge the modern aesthetic of the penthouse with the historic soul of the city I love. It is a work of architectural art that has been featured in 3 different design magazines. To Chloe, it is an inconvenience. She pulls the metal tape out, hooking it onto the edge of the bottom tread and pulling it across the imported rug. Terrence is standing next to her, holding a crystal glass of wine, casually pointing toward the landing. This entire structure simply has to go, Chloe announces loudly, her voice echoing off the 20-foot ceilings. It is far too industrial. It feels incredibly cold, almost like a warehouse. I cannot possibly envision bringing a newborn into a space with exposed steel cables. We need something softer, Terrence. Maybe a sweeping curved staircase with white spindles. Something that actually looks like a family home, not a downtown nightclub. We can tear down this entire wall here to expand the footprint for the nursery and bring in a decorator from Greenwich to soften the harsh edges. This place needs a complete overhaul to get rid of this aggressive urban vibe. Terrence nods along, completely unbothered by the fact that they are planning the demolition of my home while my holiday dinner grows cold on the table. You are absolutely right, babe, he says, taking a sip of the wine I bought. The aesthetic here is entirely too harsh. We need to completely gut this section before the baby arrives. I will call some contractors on Monday to get some bids on tearing this metal out. I stand completely still in the entryway. The absolute sheer audacity of it all washes over me. I am watching 2 people who have never swung a hammer in their entire lives actively plan to destroy the physical manifestation of my life's work. And they are doing it with the effortless entitlement of people who believe the world exists simply to accommodate their whims. They are literally carving up my sanctuary right in front of me, measuring the exact dimensions of their disrespect. Corinne is still seated at the head of my mahogany table, watching the couple with an expression of pure matriarchal pride. She ignores my presence entirely, acting as if my eviction is already a finalized transaction. She takes another sip of champagne and smiles. Do not worry about the budget. Chloe Corinne projects her voice across the room, ensuring every syllable lands with maximum impact. You and Terrence deserve a proper environment to raise my grandchild. I will personally write the check for the renovation. We will hire a reputable contractor on Monday to come in and tear all of this out. It is the least the family trust can do to bring this property up to our standards. We simply cannot have the next generation of our bloodline growing up in a space that looks like it was designed by a street artist. We will erase all of this aggressive urban influence and turn it into a respectable space, a space fit for our family. They are actively erasing me. They are standing in the center of my multi-million-dollar empire, the physical proof of my triumph over every obstacle I ever faced, and they are discussing how quickly they can strip my identity from the walls. Corinne's offer to write a check using her failing family trust to demolish the staircase I paid for with my own staging firm's profits is a level of delusion that transcends arrogance. They are feeding off a fantasy that Andre created, a fantasy where I am nothing and they are everything. They have already packed my bags in their minds. They have already painted the nursery. They have already reclaimed their son and discarded the working-class girl from the West End. They think my silence is surrender. They think my lack of screaming means they have won. I watch Chloe reel the tape measure back in with a loud metallic zip. She turns her attention to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the Atlanta skyline, pointing out where she wants to install heavy drapes to block out the city lights. She complains that the view is too busy, too chaotic for a peaceful home environment. She is treating my home like a blank canvas, completely blind to the fact that she is standing inside a masterpiece that she could never afford. I do not feel the urge to scream. I do not feel the urge to throw the beautiful spread of food onto the floor or shatter the crystal glasses. The white-hot rage that had consumed me in the hallway with Andre has distilled into something entirely different. It has become a cold, calculating, and absolute focus. I am a woman who builds things from the ground up, but I also know exactly how to execute a controlled demolition. I know how to bring a structure down without collateral damage, and I am about to bring their entire world crashing down around them. I reach into the pocket of my dress and pull out my phone. I slowly walk into the center of the room, my footsteps entirely silent against the thick rugs, until I am standing just a few feet away from Chloe and her yellow tape measure. The entire room is bathed in the warm, inviting light of the custom fixtures I programmed myself. I look down at my phone screen and open my smart home application. With a single deliberate press of my thumb, I activate the security lockdown protocol. The heavy deadbolts on the front door slide into place with a loud, synchronized clack. The private elevator access panel goes dark, locking the car on the ground floor. The ambient jazz music abruptly cuts off, leaving the room in a sudden, ringing silence. Chloe freezes the tape measure dangling from her fingers. Terrence lowers his wine glass, a confused frown wrinkling his forehead. Corinne finally turns her head to look at me, her patronizing smile faltering as she registers the distinct shift in the room's atmosphere. The sudden quiet is deafening. I raise my head and lock eyes with Chloe, letting the absolute certainty of my power radiate through the silence. I wouldn't start measuring just yet, Chloe. The heavy silence of the locked-down penthouse was shattered by the sharp metallic clatter of Chloe dropping the yellow tape measure onto the hardwood floor. The heavy smart blinds hummed quietly as they automatically descended over the panoramic windows, sealing the dining room in a cocoon of warm, artificial light. The physical reality of the space shifting out of their control finally registered on the faces of my in-laws. Corinne's chair scraped violently against the floorboards as she pushed herself up. She rose to her full height, her chest heaving, the double strand of heirloom pearls around her neck practically rattling with her indignation. The mask of the gracious old money matriarch completely dissolved, revealing the ruthless, class-obsessed dictator underneath. "Unlock those doors immediately," she commanded, her voice cracking like a whip across the dining table. "You forget yourself, Zuri. You think a few cheap theatrics will intimidate us? You think locking us inside my son's property gives you some sort of leverage?" I remained perfectly still, my phone resting loosely in my palm. I did not blink. I did not move to obey. Corinne's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. She viewed my absolute refusal to submit not just as personal disrespect, but as a direct assault on the pristine, carefully curated image of Black excellence her family had spent decades constructing. In her mind, I was the unrefined interloper, a charity case brought in from the historic West End, who was now attempting to stage a coup. "You listen to me very carefully," she hissed, leaning heavily over the marble island, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "You are playing a very dangerous game with people who hold the keys to this city. I know exactly how you make your living. I know you rely on commercial real estate contracts to keep that little staging firm of yours afloat. Do you honestly believe your meager hustle exists in a vacuum? She lifted a perfectly manicured finger, pointing it directly at my chest like a loaded weapon. I sit on the charity boards with the managing partners of the firms you work for. I play tennis with the wives of the developers who hire you. We are the pinnacle of this city's elite. We control the network you are so desperately trying to claw your way into. Corinne took a slow, menacing step around the table, putting herself between me and Chloe, shielding her white daughter-in-law while preparing to execute her own. If you embarrass my son tonight, she warned, her voice dropping into a low, terrifying register. If you disrespect Chloe again, or if you refuse to sign that lease and integrate into the structure of this family, I will make 3 phone calls. By Monday morning, every major commercial contract you rely on will vanish. I will personally ensure your firm is blacklisted from every luxury high-rise development in the greater Atlanta area. I will ruin your business so thoroughly, you will be begging to go back to flipping cheap houses in the slums. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Corinne genuinely believed she held my entire financial existence in the palm of her hand. She thought the wealth Andre projected was the only thing keeping me from poverty, completely ignorant to the fact that she was threatening to destroy the very income that paid for the roof currently over her head. She stood tall, adopting the posture of a queen addressing a disobedient servant. "You are a guest in the kingdom my husband built." Corinne sneered, her lip curling in profound disgust. "You will respect the hierarchy, or you will pack your cheap bags tonight and find your way back to whatever hole Andre pulled you out of." The sheer unadulterated venom in her words echoed off the custom acoustic ceiling panels. I slowly shifted my gaze away from Corinne's furious face and looked down at my husband. The man who knew the truth. The man who knew that my staging firm brought in millions, that my name was on the deed to this penthouse, and that his mother's threats were aimed at the very foundation of the lifestyle he was currently pretending to fund. This was his moment. This was the absolute final opportunity for Andre to stand up, intercept his mother's cruelty, and confess his web of pathetic lies. I watched his chest rise and fall. I watched his jaw clench. I waited for the man I married to defend my honor. Andre finally found his voice. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor, brushing the dust off his tailored slacks. He did not look at his mother. He did not confront his brother or his sister-in-law. Instead, he turned his panicked, bloodshot eyes directly onto me. His face was twisted into an expression of desperate anger, projecting all of his own cowardice onto my shoulders. "Zuri, you are being completely unreasonable." He snapped, his voice shaking with misplaced frustration. "Why are you doing this? Why are you pushing her?" I stared at him, the chill in my veins turning to absolute ice. "She is right," he continued, gesturing wildly toward Corinne. "You are risking your entire livelihood over stubborn pride. It is a simple piece of paper. It is just a bedroom. Why do you always have to make everything a battle? Why can you not just compromise and show some respect for the way this family operates?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a harsh, pleading whisper that only I could hear over his mother's heavy breathing. "Just unlock the doors. Apologize to my mother, sign the damn lease, and let Chloe have the suite. You are going to ruin everything I have built here if you do not stop acting like you run things." The betrayal was total. It was not just that he was too cowardly to admit his financial inferiority to his family. It was that he was actively willing to watch his mother destroy my career, my reputation, and my dignity, just to keep his fragile ego intact. He was weaponizing the business I built with my own 2 hands to force me into submitting to a hierarchy that did not even exist. The room absorbed Andre's pathetic plea, the heavy acoustic panels trapping his cowardice and echoing it back into my ears. He was actually asking me to submit. He was looking at the woman he married, the woman whose bank accounts were currently keeping his entire fraudulent lifestyle afloat, and demanding that I lie down so his mother and sister-in-law could wipe their designer shoes on my back. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The absolute stillness of my posture was enough to make Andre take a hesitant step backward, his eyes darting nervously toward the locked smart doors. "You want me to apologize?" I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion, cutting through the thick tension like a scalpel. You want me to hand over $2,000 a month to your mother, sign a fake lease, and let Chloe gut my master bedroom, all because you are too much of a coward to admit you are living off my dime. Keep your voice down, Andre hissed, his face flushing a deep, humiliated purple. He shot a frantic look at Corinne, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of confusion and mounting rage. I am trying to protect you, Zuri. If you just respect the hierarchy, if you just play your part, my mother will not have to make those calls. You do not understand how things work in our world. Your world is an illusion, Andre, I replied, stepping directly into his personal space, forcing him to look down at me. Your world is a crumbling stage set, and I am the only one paying the electric bill to keep the lights on. Terrence slammed his crystal wineglass down onto the mahogany dining table. The sharp, resonant crack of the heavy glass hitting the wood caused Chloe to jump. Terrence had finally reached his limit. He was a senior partner at a law firm, a man accustomed to commanding rooms and bullying witnesses, and he clearly decided it was time to put his brother's unruly wife in her place. All right, that is enough. Terrence boomed, his voice incredibly loud, dripping with the same toxic entitlement that infected his mother. He marched around the table, pointing an accusatory finger at my face. You are completely out of line, Zuri. You lock us in here like animals. You disrespect my wife. You stand there and talk down to my brother after everything he has done to elevate you. Elevate me? I asked, turning my cold gaze onto Terrence. Yes, elevate you, Terrence barked. His chest puffed out aggressively, inserting himself between Andre and me. Andre brought you into this family. He gave you a seat at this table. He put a roof over your head that you could never afford on your own. Do you have any idea the immense pressure he is under to keep this family's standard of living intact? Corinne nodded approvingly from the head of the table, her posture rigid. Listen to your brother-in-law, Zuri. He speaks the absolute truth. Terrence was practically vibrating with righteous indignation. His face was red, his veins popping against his stiff collar. He was so eager to defend the pristine image of the Spellman and Morehouse dynasty, so desperate to put me in my place, that he completely lost control of his own mouth. You have zero right to attack him, Terrence yelled, the volume of his voice vibrating the silverware on the table. Andre busts his back to provide this lifestyle for you. He deserves this penthouse. He deserves the master suite. He deserves some damn respect from his wife, especially after he had to borrow $50,000 from the family business just to cover his hidden credit card debt. The silence that slammed into the room was absolute, total, and completely suffocating. It was as if all the oxygen had been instantly vacuumed out of the penthouse. Terrence's chest was still heaving, his arms still raised, pointing at me, but the fire in his eyes suddenly vanished, replaced by an immediate, sickening realization of what he had just done. Chloe gasped, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth. Corinne's smug, imperious mask shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The color drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. She grabbed the edge of the marble island, her knuckles turning bone-white, her mouth opening and closing in a desperate attempt to formulate a sentence that would not come. I slowly turned my head and looked at Andre. He looked like a man standing on the gallows. His skin was an ashy, terrifying gray. He was staring at Terrence with wide, unblinking eyes, his breathing completely suspended. The pieces of the puzzle, the strange financial discrepancies I had noticed over the last year, began crashing together in my mind with brutal, perfect clarity. I did not keep it to myself. I let the realization spill out of my mouth, forcing them to listen to the autopsy of their own lies. $50,000. I repeated the number, slicing through the dead air of the dining room. Zuri, stop. Andre pleaded, his voice a pathetic, broken croak. Do not interrupt me, I snapped, never breaking eye contact with him. I took a slow step backward, taking in the entire miserable group. $50,000 in hidden credit card debt. That explains so much, Andre. That explains why your name is not on a single utility bill in this penthouse. That explains why you told me your money was tied up in aggressive stock market investments, so I needed to cover the groceries, the homeowners association fees, the property taxes, and the maintenance costs. I paced slowly across the edge of the living room, calculating the fraud in real time. You told me you were building our future, but you were not building anything. You were surviving off my staging firm's income to pay for our daily existence. Zuri, please, Andre whispered, tears actually pooling in his eyes. And while I was funding your basic survival, I continued, my voice gaining strength, echoing loudly off the floor-to-ceiling windows. You were using your credit cards to buy those custom-tailored Italian suits. You were buying that Rolex on your wrist. You were paying for expensive dinners at the country club to impress Terrence and Chloe. You were playing the role of the wealthy, old-money elite, and you put it all on plastic. I turned my gaze to Corinne. The matriarch was physically shaking her perfectly styled hair, suddenly looking severe and harsh against her pale skin. But the credit cards maxed out, did they not? I asked, addressing the room, laying their shame completely bare. The bank manager's salary could not cover the minimum payments. The interest started compounding. You were drowning, Andre. So you went to Mommy and your brother. You went to the Great Family Trust, the unbreakable generational wealth. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that made Chloe flinch. But you did not just borrow from a booming empire, did you? I said, the final, most devastating truth clicking into place. I looked directly at Corinne, watching the absolute terror completely overtake her features. If the family business was doing so incredibly well, if you had all this generational wealth, Terrence would not be shouting about a $50,000 loan like it was a massive burden. 50 grand to an elite family is pocket change. I walked toward the head of the table, resting my hands flat on the mahogany surface, leaning in close to my mother-in-law. But it is not pocket change to you, Corinne, is it? I demanded. You are broke. The family business is failing. You are financially bleeding. That is why you brought that fake lease into my home today. You do not just want control. You desperately need my $2,000 a month to keep up appearances. Terrence, shut your mouth, Corinne suddenly shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, ugly register. She slammed her hand against the table, glaring at her youngest son with pure hatred. Do not say another word. But the damage was entirely irreversibly done. The carefully curated illusion of black excellence, the weapon they had used to beat me down and make me feel inferior, had evaporated into thin air. They were not royalty. They were drowning in debt, drowning in lies, and looking for a life raft. And they had foolishly tried to sink the only woman capable of keeping them afloat. The suffocating silence in the dining room stretched into an unbearable eternity. The air was thick, heavy with the toxic residue of Terrence's massive, fatal error. Corinne was clutching the edge of the marble island so tightly, her knuckles were completely white, her chest heaving as she glared at her youngest son with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Terrence stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the realization of his catastrophic slip-up paralyzing his entire body. Andre looked like a dead man, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately searching for a place to hide from the absolute ruin of his carefully constructed lies. I had just laid their financial rot bare. I had spoken the truth aloud, pulling back the velvet curtain to reveal the decaying, bankrupt reality of the Spellman and Morehouse dynasty. They were drowning in debt, bleeding cash, and completely reliant on my income to keep up their aristocratic charade. The normal human response to such a profound public unmasking would be shame. A normal family would apologize, retreat, and attempt to salvage whatever shred of dignity remained. But the Wilsons were not normal. Their entitlement was a generational sickness, a disease that infected their very bones. When cornered, they did not feel remorse. They felt anger. It was Chloe who broke the silence. She took a delicate step forward, smoothing the front of her pastel cashmere cardigan with an exaggerated shaking breath. She positioned herself directly beside Andre, placing a comforting manicured hand on his shoulder in a nauseating display of solidarity. She tilted her head, softening her features, and looked at me with a sickening display of practiced, faux sympathetic pity. It was the exact look a wealthy patron gives a stray dog before calling animal control to have it removed. Zuri, honey. Let us just take the temperature down in here. Chloe began, her voice dropping into a soft, patronizing kindergarten teacher cadence. We all understand that you are feeling highly emotional and overwhelmed right now. Finding out about family financial restructuring can be confusing for someone who is not used to managing generational assets. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer scale of her delusion. She was standing in my dining room lecturing me about generational assets mere seconds after her husband admitted they were siphoning money to cover basic credit card debt. You have to see the bigger picture, Chloe continued, her tone dripping with condescension. Andre is under tremendous stress trying to manage his obligations to this family trust. Sometimes funds need to be reallocated between accounts. It is just business. You making a massive dramatic scene about a temporary cash flow issue is exactly why Corinne felt the need to bring the lease today. You are far too volatile. You simply do not understand how things work at this level. Corinne immediately seized the lifeline her daughter-in-law had thrown. The matriarch straightened her spine, pulling her shoulders back and lifting her chin. She drew strength from Chloe's absolute refusal to accept reality. Chloe is entirely correct, Corinne stated, her voice regaining its icy, authoritative edge. This family has weathered economic shifts for decades. A $50,000 internal transfer is pocket change. It is none of your concern, Zuri. Your reaction today only proves that you lack the refinement required to be part of our inner circle. Let us just be adults about this situation, Chloe said, sighing heavily, as if my very presence was exhausting her. This penthouse is family property, and right now Terrence and I need the space for the baby. We need to begin the renovations immediately to ensure the environment is suitable for a newborn. She reached down and picked up the yellow steel tape measure she had dropped moments earlier, clutching it to her chest like a shield. My interior designer Julian is arriving tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, Chloe announced, her voice hardening with absolute authority. We are doing a complete walkthrough to finalize the demolition plans for that awful industrial staircase and the master suite. Julian charges $500 an hour and his schedule is incredibly tight. I really do not want your emotional drama ruining the consultation. Chloe offered me a tight, merciless smile. So if you could just hurry up and pack your things tonight, it would be best for everyone involved. You can take an Uber to a hotel downtown. Andre will wire you some money for the weekend to cover your expenses until you figure out a permanent living situation back in your old neighborhood. The audacity was so profound it bordered on comedy. They had entirely bypassed the reality of their bankruptcy and circled right back to demanding my eviction. They moved in unison. Corinne stepped forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with Chloe. Terrence, shaking off his earlier shock, moved to his wife's other side. Andre, the ultimate coward, flanked his mother. They formed a literal wall of beige cashmere-tailored wool and unearned superiority across my living room. 4 people bound by blood marriage and a shared delusion physically blocking my space. They all crossed their arms over their chests simultaneously. They lifted their chins. They stared me down. It was a tactic I had seen them use a dozen times before. I had seen them use this exact formation of old money intimidation to bully restaurant managers, to berate valet drivers, to crush anyone they deemed beneath their social station. They were trying to use their combined aristocratic weight to crush me into dust. They expected the girl from the historic West End to finally crack under the pressure. They expected me to scream, to throw a tantrum, or to dissolve into tears and run to the bedroom to pack my bags. They believed that their collective pedigree was a weapon I could not possibly defend against. They thought my absolute silence was the sound of my final surrender. I did not break. I did not cry. I did not scream. A profound, icy, almost euphoric calm washed over my entire body. I looked at the 4 of them standing there in their expensive, unpaid-for clothes, clinging to a throne that was already burning to the ground, and I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was not a nervous smile. It was the dark, calculating smile of a woman who had just locked the cage from the inside. I broke eye contact with Corinne and simply walked forward. I moved with slow, deliberate steps across the thick Persian rug, walking directly toward their united front. Chloe let out an indignant, offended scoff and took a quick half step backward as I passed her, clearly appalled that I was not scrambling for my suitcase. Corinne's eyes widened in shock as I ignored her completely. I walked right past the firing squad and headed toward the far wall of the dining space. This wall was my pride and joy, featuring custom floor-to-ceiling built-in bookshelves that I had designed myself. The shelves housed my extensive collection of architectural digests, vintage design books, and my staging firm's industry awards. I stopped in front of the third shelf. I reached up and firmly grabbed a heavy, leather-bound volume on Italian Renaissance architecture. I pulled the massive book forward and set it on the marble credenza below. Hidden directly behind the book, flush against the dark wood of the cabinetry, was a sleek black steel digital wall safe. I could hear the sudden nervous shifting of feet behind me. Terrence muttered something low and confused under his breath. Andre let out a sharp, panicked breath. They had never known the safe was there. I placed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The light blinked green. I quickly punched in my 6-digit numerical code. The heavy steel door released with a loud, resonant mechanical click that echoed through the dead silence of the room. I reached inside the dark cavity. I bypassed the emergency cache, the jewelry, and the backup hard drives. My fingers found exactly what I was looking for. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I held it in my hand, feeling the solid weight of the legal parchment inside. This was my ultimate insurance policy. This was the document I had kept filed away in the dark, never intending to use it against the man I loved, until he proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was a parasite. I pushed the heavy steel door closed. I turned slowly back around to face the room. They were still standing in their ridiculous formation, but the arrogant confidence was rapidly draining from their faces. The smug certainty had vanished, replaced by a creeping cold, an entirely unknown dread. Corinne was staring at the folder in my hand as if it were a live grenade. Andre was visibly trembling. I locked eyes with Chloe. She was still gripping her bright yellow tape measure, her knuckles white, her faux, sympathetic smile completely gone. "That is very funny, Chloe," I said, my voice projecting across the room with crystal-clear, devastating precision. I slowly tapped the thick manila folder against my open palm, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. "You bringing an interior designer here at 8 in the morning? Because the actual owner of this building is standing right here." I hold their stunned, breathless silence for a long, delicious moment. I let the absolute gravity of my words settle over them, watching the confusion mutate into raw, unfiltered panic. Then I move. My heels click rhythmically against the imported hardwood as I walk away from the digital safe and approach the center of the dining room. In my hands, I carry a heavy leather-bound portfolio I had pulled from the thick manila envelope. I lift the portfolio high enough for everyone to see the custom embossed gold lettering of my staging firm on the cover, and then I let it fall. It lands dead center on the dining table, coming down squarely on top of Corinne's utterly useless, insulting fake lease agreement. The heavy, visceral thud echoes off the 20-foot ceilings. It is a physical manifestation of the power dynamic shifting permanently, violently into my hands. Corinne flinches, her shoulders jumping toward her ears. Terrence takes a defensive half-step forward, staring at the leather cover as if it contains a live explosive. I do not hesitate. I reach out and flip the heavy leather cover open. The crisp white legal documents inside are arranged with the exact meticulous precision I use to stage multi-million-dollar properties. Every page tells a story, and tonight I am reading it to them in full. I pull out the first document. The paper is thick watermarked and stamped with the official blue seal of the Fulton County Registrar. I slide it across the smooth mahogany surface. It glides perfectly, stopping right at the edge of Corinne's manicured fingertips. She looks down at it, but she refuses to pick it up. Her eyes remain locked on my face, burning with a mixture of defiance and absolute terror. "Read it, Corinne," I command, my voice low, dangerous, and completely steady. She does not move. She barely breathes. "Fine, I will read it for you," I say, leaning over the table and pressing my palms flat against the warm wood. This is the master deed to Penthouse Unit 42. It was recorded 4 years ago. The listed owner is a holding company called West End Holdings, LLC. And if you turn to the second page, which I highly recommend you do, you will see the Articles of Incorporation. I reach into the portfolio, extract the second document, and slap it down right next to the deed. Sole proprietor Zuri Washington, I announce, pronouncing every single syllable with lethal clarity. Not Andre, not the Spellman Family Trust. Me. I own the concrete beneath your feet. I own the steel beams above your head. I own the air you are currently breathing. Chloe lets out a sharp, genuine gasp, stumbling backward until her back hits the edge of a dining chair. Terrence snatches the document off the table. As a senior partner at a law firm, his eyes scan the legal jargon with the desperate, frantic speed of a lawyer hunting for a loophole. He flips through the pages, checking for hidden clauses for co-signers, for any indication that his family's money is tied to the property. He finds absolutely nothing. His eyes widen as he registers the official stamps, the dates, and my singular signature. He looks up from the papers, turning a horrified gaze toward his brother. Andre, what is this? Is this true? Andre cannot speak. He is staring down at his own expensive Italian leather shoes. His shoulders slumped forward, the picture of a thoroughly defeated man. He has been stripped of his armor, and everyone in the room can finally see the naked, pathetic truth of his existence. He looks like a child who has been caught stealing. But I am nowhere near finished. I reach back into the leather portfolio and pull out a thick, heavy stack of printed bank statements. I have highlighted the relevant lines in bright, unapologetic neon yellow. I toss the stack onto the table. It lands with a heavy slap next to the deed. Those are the wire transfers, I explain, pacing slowly behind the row of dining chairs. Every single month for the last 48 months. The mortgage payments, the property taxes, the luxury building association fees, the special assessments for the custom lobby renovations. Every single dime came directly from my staging firm's corporate accounts. I stopped directly behind Andre, resting my hands lightly on the back of his chair. He physically shrinks away from my presence, pulling his shoulders inward. Take a good long look at those statements, Terrence, I say, my voice ringing out clear and sharp. As a man of finance, you should appreciate the math. You will notice a glaring, undeniable omission. There is not a single transfer from your brother. There is not a single check written from his accounts. He has never paid a dime toward the equity of this property, not one. I walk back to the head of the table, facing them all, claiming the physical space that belongs to me. For 4 years, Andre has played the role of the generous provider, I say, letting the absolute disgust bleed into my tone. He told you he bought this place. He let you walk in here and treat it like a family asset. He let you, Corinne, believe that his incredible success was funding my life. But the truth is, I let him put his name on the utility bill for the guest bathroom just so he could feel like he was contributing something to our household. I let him pretend to be the king of a castle he did not build because I loved him and I wanted to protect his fragile, pathetic ego. I turn my gaze directly onto Chloe. She is trembling, the yellow tape measure completely forgotten on the floor somewhere behind her. So Chloe, I say, my voice dropping into a chilling whisper, when your $500 an hour interior designer arrives tomorrow at 8 in the morning, you can tell him to turn right back around. There will be no demolition. There will be no sweeping curved staircase. There will be no Greenwich decorator coming to soften the harsh edges of my home. Because you are standing in my house and you are no longer welcome here. The silence that follows is deafening. The reality of their situation has finally completely crashed down upon them. Corinne is staring blankly at the highlighted bank statements. She is a woman who understands numbers, who understands the brute, unforgiving force of capital. The realization is washing over her, violently pulling her underwater. The son she paraded around as the pinnacle of their family's success is a complete fraud. He is a dependent, a kept man. He is the very thing she had spent the entire evening accusing me of being. Her hands are shaking slightly as she reaches out and touches the edge of the official deed. The color has entirely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow, aged, and thoroughly broken. For a fraction of a second, I think she might actually apologize. I think the sheer weight of the evidence might force her to acknowledge the reality of the situation and the depth of her own cruelty. But Corinne is a creature of immense toxic pride. The truth has cornered her, stripped her of her primary weapon, and humiliated her favored son, but she refuses to surrender the war. She cannot allow the girl from the West End to win. She cannot allow her perfectly curated worldview to be shattered by someone she deems socially inferior. She straightens her spine, taking a deep, shuddering breath that fills her chest. She pushes the legal documents away from her, sliding them back across the mahogany table, as if the paper itself is contaminated. She lifts her chin, her eyes finding mine. They are no longer filled with confident disdain, but they are hard, cold, and desperate. Fine, Corinne says, her voice trembling slightly before she forces it into a cold, flat register. You own one apartment. That does not give you the right to disrespect this family. Corinne's jaw sets into a stubborn, rigid line. The irrefutable proof of her son's financial parasitism is sitting right in front of her, yet she violently clings to her delusions of superiority. She lifts her chin, her eyes burning with a desperate, frantic arrogance. Fine, she snaps, her voice brittle and shaking. You own one apartment. That does not give you the right to disrespect this family. You are still dealing with a dynasty, Zuri. Do not mistake a single real estate transaction for true power. I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. The sheer audacity it takes to look at the wreckage of her son's lies and still demand respect is almost impressive. Almost. I do not raise my voice. I do not argue. I simply reach back into the leather portfolio. There is one final document left inside. It is significantly thicker than the unit deed, bound tightly with a heavy brass clip. I pull it out and slide it across the smooth mahogany surface. It glides perfectly, stopping right next to the highlighted bank statements and the penthouse deed. One apartment, I repeat, letting the words roll off my tongue with deadly precision. You actually think West End Holdings LLC was formed to hold a single residential unit? Terrence cannot stop himself. His legal instincts completely override his loyalty to his mother's crumbling facade. He reaches out with a shaking hand and flips open the heavy brass clip. He stares at the first page, his eyes darting rapidly across the text. He blinks hard once, twice, as if trying to clear his vision. He flips to the second page, then the third. His breathing turns shallow and rapid. Terrence, Corinne demands, her voice cracking with rising panic. What is it? What does it say? Terrence does not look at his mother. He slowly raises his head and looks directly at me. His eyes are wide with a mixture of absolute shock and reluctant, horrified awe. It is a master deed, he whispers, his voice barely carrying across the table. A commercial multifamily master deed. Read the parcel description, Terrence, then I command, stepping away from Andre's chair and claiming the center of the room. You are the senior partner. Tell your mother exactly what she is looking at. He swallows hard, his eyes dropping back to the heavy, watermarked paper. It covers the entire lot. He reads, his voice trembling so badly, the paper shakes in his hands. The underground parking structure, the ground floor commercial retail spaces, all 80 luxury residential units across 20 floors, the rooftop amenities. He pauses, his face draining of all color. The sole proprietor of the holding company is Zuri Washington. The property valuation is listed at $45 million. The room goes dead. The silence is absolute, deafening, and completely suffocating. No, Corinne whispers, shaking her head as if physically trying to reject the words hanging in the air. That is impossible. She is a home stager. She buys cheap furniture and puts it in empty houses. Andre must have co-signed. Andre must be the primary investor. There is no co-signer, Mom, Terrence says, dropping the document onto the table as if it burned his fingers. It is a single-member LLC. She owns everything. I own a staging firm, Corinne. Yes, I say, my voice carrying the steady, resonant power of a woman who has built an empire from the dirt up. I started by staging houses. Then I started buying the houses I staged. Then I bought commercial lots. 5 years ago, I bought the dilapidated, abandoned textile mill that used to sit on this exact city block. I spent 2 years navigating the city zoning board, securing commercial development loans, and overseeing the architectural redesign. I turn my gaze to Chloe. She is standing perfectly still, her face entirely drained of blood. She had picked up her yellow steel tape measure earlier in a desperate attempt to look busy, but her fingers simply go slack. The heavy metal casing slips from her grip, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp final clatter that echoes like a gunshot. She does not even look down. She realizes with crushing, humiliating certainty that she was just actively planning to demolish the private residence of the building's owner. "You wanted to tear out the staircase, Chloe," I ask, taking a slow step toward her. She shrinks back against Terrence, her eyes wide with fear. "You thought the aesthetic was too harsh, too industrial." I hand-selected the reclaimed steel for that staircase. I oversaw the pouring of every concrete pillar in this building. I stood on this site in a hard hat and work boots at 5 in the morning while my husband was sleeping off his expensive whiskey hangovers, making sure the foundation of this high-rise was perfectly level. I am not a tenant in this building. I am the developer. I am the sole owner of the entire 20-story structure you are currently standing inside. The realization hits them with the concussive force of a physical blow. The air pressure in the room seems to crush them. They are not sitting in Andre's apartment. They are sitting in the crown jewel of my commercial real estate empire. I turn back to Andre. He is looking at me with a sickening mixture of fear and absolute devastation. He knew I was successful. He knew I had money. But his own fragile masculinity, his desperate need to project the image of the wealthy provider, had prevented him from ever asking about the actual scale of my business. He willfully blinded himself to the fact that he was married to a mogul because it did not fit the narrative his family required. He thought West End Holdings was just a tax shelter for my staging income. He had absolutely no idea it was a multi-million-dollar commercial development firm. "You let them come in here," I say to Andre, my voice vibrating with absolute disgust. "You let your mother parade around my property, measuring my walls, planning to evict me from a building I built with my own sweat. You let them believe you are footing the bill when you do not even possess the capital to buy the custom glass doors in the downstairs lobby. You maxed out your credit cards playing the part of a rich man while your wife was out actually becoming one." Andre opens his mouth, a pathetic strangled sound escaping his throat, but he has absolutely no defense. There are no more lies left to tell. The truth is sitting on the dining table, stamped, sealed, and legally binding. I look back at Corinne, the great terrifying matriarch of the Spellman and Morehouse dynasty, the woman who had just threatened to ruin my business by calling her country club friends. She looks physically shrunken. Her shoulders are slumped, her chest caved in. The immense, terrifying reality of my wealth has completely overpowered her faux aristocratic lineage. She realizes with crushing certainty that the people she plays tennis with are the same people who are begging my development firm for commercial leases. I do not need her network to survive. I own the network. I walk slowly back to the head of the table. I reach down and pick up the ridiculous fraudulent lease agreement Corinne had shoved in my face less than an hour ago. I hold it up between two fingers, dangling it in the air like a piece of filthy trash. "You came into my home, drank my wine, and tried to force me to sign a lease for my own property," I say, my voice dead and cold. "You demanded $2,000 a month from me to fund your failing family trust. You tried to intimidate me with your old money, completely blind to the new empire towering right over your head." I drop the fake lease onto the floor and step on it with the heel of my shoe. "You wanted rent, Corinne?" I ask, locking my eyes onto her terrified face. "Let's talk about rent." Corinne's mouth opens and closes, but no sound comes out. The great terrifying matriarch of the Spellman and Morehouse dynasty has finally been rendered completely speechless. Her gaze drops to the floor, staring blankly at the crumpled fake lease agreement pinned securely beneath the heel of my shoe. The air in the penthouse feels thick and electrified, vibrating with the sudden violent collapse of their generational delusion. I do not give her the luxury of time to recover. The wrecking ball has already swung through the walls of their aristocratic facade, and now I am going to obliterate the very foundation they stand on. I pivot slowly, turning my full, unforgiving attention away from Corinne and directly toward my husband. Andre is standing near the kitchen island, gripping the edge of the cold marble so tightly his knuckles are completely white. He looks like a ghost. Sweat is beading on his forehead, and his breathing is shallow and erratic, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked hitches. He knows what is coming next. He can feel the executioner's axe hovering right above his neck. I reach back into the heavy leather portfolio. The sound of the crisp paper rustling seems unnaturally loud in the deadened silence of the dining room. I extract a thick, neatly stapled stack of bank statements. These are not the commercial accounts for West End Holdings. These are deeply, painfully personal. I slap the stack down onto the mahogany table right next to the master deed. The sharp, cracking smack of the paper hitting the wood makes Andre flinch violently. Let us talk about our joint household account. I announce, my voice carrying a lethal, echoing clarity that commands the entire room. The account we opened 3 days after our wedding. The account where we agreed as equal partners to deposit a set percentage of our monthly earnings to cover our shared living expenses. I take a deliberate step forward, keeping my eyes locked on him. I slowly begin to turn the pages of the bank statements, the thick paper snapping sharply under my fingers. For the first 2 years, it was a beautiful arrangement, I say, pacing slowly behind the row of high-backed dining chairs. We were a team. We were building a life together. But then things started to shift. You started making excuses about delayed client payments. You talked endlessly about reinvesting capital into your boutique consulting firm to secure larger international accounts. You sold me a story about temporary cash flow issues while promising a massive return on investment. I stopped pacing. I traced my manicured fingernail down a long, meticulously highlighted column of numbers. Let us look at the last quarter, shall we? I ask, my tone dripping with clinical precision. August 1st. Expected deposit from Andre Spellman, $0. September 15th. Expected deposit $0. October 1st. 0. November. 0. I look up from the pages, letting the absolute zero drop like an anvil into the room. For 3 consecutive months, Andre, you have not contributed a single solitary cent to our household. Not one dime. Andre shakes his head frantically, a pathetic, desperate attempt to deny the undeniable. He opens his mouth to speak, to offer some fabricated excuse, but his voice fails him completely. At first, I thought your firm was just experiencing a dry spell. I continue walking closer to him, closing the physical distance. I covered the mortgage, which ironically was just me paying my own holding company. But I also covered everything else. The organic groceries, the utility bills for this massive penthouse, the exorbitant monthly lease on your imported German sports car, your custom-tailored Italian suits, the ridiculously expensive catered dinners you hosted for your college alumni network just to maintain your image as a titan of industry. I paid for all of it. I unknowingly funded 100% of your entire existence. Chloe lets out a sharp, disgusted breath, her eyes darting between Andre and the bank statements. Corinne remains frozen, her face turning a sickly shade of gray as the reality of her son's profound failure washes over her. Do not bother shaking your head, Andre, I say, flipping to the back of the stack and pulling out a different set of documents, these printed on bright blue paper. Forensic accounting is a standard part of commercial real estate development. My financial team is exceptionally thorough. When I noticed the missing deposits, I had them dig a little deeper. They found the secret accounts. I watch his knees physically buckle slightly. He catches himself heavily against the marble counter, his posture crumbling completely. I found out exactly where your paycheck was actually going, I say, my voice laced with venom. You were not reinvesting in your consulting firm. Your firm has been virtually bankrupt for over a year. Every single dollar you managed to scrape together, every minor commission, every pathetic consulting fee was being siphoned directly into a hidden routing account. I turn my gaze toward Corinne and Terrence, making sure they understand their absolute complicity in this specific rot. And where was that hidden routing account sending the money, I ask, projecting my voice so it hits them like a physical strike? Directly into the sinking, burning ship of the Spellman and Morehouse family business. You were bleeding yourself dry, and bleeding me by extension, just to keep the lights on at your mother's empty, failing company. I walk right up to Andre. I stand mere inches from his face. He is physically shaking now, visible tremors racking his broad shoulders and arms. He cannot look me in the eye. He stares down at my collarbone, a thoroughly broken, defeated shell of a man. You did not just lie to them to look rich, I say. my voice dropping to a low, devastating murmur that pierces through the tension in the room. You used me to subsidize your fake life. You turned your wife into a human ATM so you could keep playing the role of the wealthy heir. You are a parasite. The impact of my words reverberates through the penthouse. Corinne is staring at her eldest son with a look of absolute horrified revulsion. She is not disgusted that he lied to his wife. She is not appalled by his betrayal of our marriage vows or his profound lack of integrity. She is entirely disgusted by the fact that he is poor. In her twisted aristocratic worldview, a moral failing is perfectly acceptable. A financial failing is an unforgivable sin. He has shattered the illusion of their superiority, exposing the ugly, desperate truth behind their designer clothes. It is Terence who finally breaks ranks. The carefully maintained facade of family unity shatters into a million jagged pieces. He steps forward, closing the distance between himself and his older brother. His face is twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The veins in his neck are visibly bulging against his stiff white collar. He looks entirely unhinged, the reality of their shared financial ruin, causing him to lash out at the nearest target. "You lied to us!" Terence spits the words laced with raw, volatile venom. He points an accusatory, shaking finger directly at Andre's chest. "You stood in my living room last month and told us you were loaded. You said your firm was taking off. You let me believe you had the personal capital to bail out the trust if things went south." Andre flinches, raising his hands in a weak, defensive posture. "Terence, listen. I was trying to manage it." "Manage it," Terence roars, taking another aggressive step forward, closing in on his brother like a predator cornering wounded prey. "You let Mom believe you were the safety net. You let us think you were keeping this family afloat. You have nothing. You have been living off her money while pretending to be the savior. You are a complete fraud." The rats are finally turning on each other. The sinking ship has caused them to bare their teeth and cannibalize their own flesh and blood. Terence looks ready to physically lunge at his brother, his fists clenched tight at his sides. "I do not need them destroying my dining room." I raise a single steady hand in the air. The movement is sharp, commanding, and absolute. It stops Terence dead in his tracks. He freezes his head, snapping toward me, his chest heaving with unresolved rage. "Do not act self-righteous, Terence," I say, my voice cutting through his anger like a diamond blade slicing through glass. I lower my hand slowly, my eyes locking onto his with terrifying calm. "Do not stand there and pretend you hold the moral high ground in this room. Your brother's lies are pathetic, yes, but they are a drop in the ocean compared to the monumental fraud you have been orchestrating." I pause, ensuring I have the absolute undivided attention of every single person in the room. "Let us talk about your family business." I reach back into the heavy leather portfolio. My movements are unhurried, deliberate, and completely devoid of hesitation. The dining room is so profoundly quiet that the soft friction of my hand brushing against the leather interior sounds like a blade being drawn from a sheath. Terence stands frozen, his chest still heaving from his outburst at Andre, his eyes locked onto my hands. He is waiting for the final blow. He knows it is coming. The false bravado has entirely drained from his posture, leaving only a hollow, terrified anticipation. I pull out a single thick packet of paper, bound by a heavy black clip. It is not printed on standard white parchment. It is printed on the distinct light blue stationery used exclusively by my commercial property management firm, Washington Holdings. I place it gently on the table. It does not slam. It does not smack. It lands with a soft, definitive thud right beside the master deed to the penthouse. "What is that?" Terence asks, his voice stripped of all its previous aristocratic arrogance. He sounds like a frightened child asking about a monster under the bed. "A comprehensive commercial credit check." I reply, my tone conversational, as if we are simply discussing the weather over a cup of tea. A full, unredacted financial background report. The exact kind my underwriting team runs on every single prospective tenant looking to secure a commercial lease in one of my downtown high-rises. Corinne's head snaps up. The sickly gray pallor of her skin is suddenly flushed with a hot, panicked red. Her eyes dart from the blue packet to my face, her mind frantically trying to process the catastrophic implications of my words. I take a slow step around the dining table, trailing my hand along the edge of the mahogany. Last Tuesday, an application came across my management team's desk, I announce, projecting my voice so every syllable rings out with devastating clarity. A request for a 5-year lease on a modest 3,000 square foot office space in the Apex Tower, a building that I happen to own outright, completely free and clear of any encumbrances. I stop and look directly at Corinne. She is holding her breath. The prospective tenant was a holding company listed as Spellman and Morehouse, LLC, I state smoothly. Chloe lets out a sharp, involuntary gasp. She looks at Terrence, her eyes wide with shock. Terrence refuses to look at his wife. He is staring at the blue packet on the table as if it is radioactive. My team flagged the application immediately and brought it directly to my office. I continue walking toward the head of the table. At first, I was confused. Why would the legendary generational Spellman and Morehouse firm be looking to downgrade from their premium 10,000 square foot suite in Buckhead to a modest floor in one of my commercial spaces? I pick up the blue packet, flip open the heavy black clip, and turn to the second page. So, I instructed my underwriters to do a deep dive into the holding company's financials to see if they qualified for the lease, I say, looking down at the rows of printed numbers. And what my team found was nothing short of a complete financial massacre. "Stop, Corinne," whispers her voice, a fragile, raspy croak. She raises a trembling hand, her heavy diamond rings catching the light, begging me to remain silent. "Zuri, I am warning you." "You are in no position to warn anyone, Corinne," I reply, my voice turning to absolute ice. "You lost the right to dictate the terms of this conversation the moment you marched into my home and handed me a fake eviction notice." I turn my attention back to the report in my hands, holding it up like a preacher holding a holy text. "Outstanding commercial liabilities exceeding $4.2 million," I read aloud, letting the staggering number crash into the room. 3 defaulted business loans, 6 consecutive months of missed vendor payments, a severe active lien from the Internal Revenue Service for unpaid corporate taxes dating back 2 years. And the most damning detail of all, zero liquidity, absolutely zero cash reserves. Terrence stumbles backward, his legs hitting the edge of a dining chair. He collapses into it, burying his face in his hands. A low, agonizing groan escapes his lips. The reality of his absolute ruin has finally broken his mind. "You are completely bankrupt," I say, lowering the document and looking directly at the matriarch of the family. "The Spellman and Morehouse dynasty is dead. It is a hollow, rotting shell. Your premium office in Buckhead. You are not choosing to relocate. You are being actively evicted for non-payment of rent." I turn to Andre. He is still leaning heavily against the Marble Island, tears streaming silently down his face, a pathetic display of cowardice. "That $50,000 you siphoned out of our joint household account?" I ask him, my tone dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "That was not an investment. That was you desperately trying to make payroll for your mother's last 3 remaining employees so they would not file a lawsuit against the firm. You were stealing from your own wife just to keep the lights on for 1 more month." "I was trying to save us!" Andre chokes out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I was trying to save the legacy." "There is no legacy," I shout, my voice finally rising, shattering the remaining tension in the room like glass. "There is only debt. There is only fraud. You are all walking around in imported cashmere, drinking expensive wine, acting like you own the world, while secretly drowning in an ocean of unpaid bills." The arrogant masks have completely and utterly shattered. The physical transformation of the 4 people in my dining room is absolute. Chloe, the woman who had smirked at me with pure condescension just 20 minutes ago, is now looking at her husband with an expression of profound, unfiltered horror. She takes a slow, deliberate step away from Terrence. The realization that she has married into a bankrupt family, that the generational wealth she coveted does not exist, has broken her spirit. The designer clothes, the country club memberships, the private preschools for her future child, everything has evaporated into thin air. Terrence is paralyzed in the dining chair, staring blankly at the wall, completely unable to process the destruction of his entire identity. Andre is weeping openly now, stripped of his pride, his ego, and his marriage. And then there is Corinne. The great matriarch is standing in the center of the room, completely surrounded by the wreckage of her own arrogance. She looks down at the table. The master deed, the bank statements, the commercial credit rejection. It is an insurmountable mountain of evidence proving that she has failed. She is a woman who has spent her entire life judging people based on their net worth, and she has just been confronted with the devastating reality that her net worth is entirely negative. She has nothing. I have everything. I watch the gears grinding behind her eyes. I watch her mind frantically scrambling for a way out, a way to survive the fallout of her monumental stupidity. She is trapped in a corner, backed against a wall made of her own lies. Then, the most extraordinary, stomach-turning thing happens. Corinne reaches up and smooths her hair. She wipes the desperate, harsh lines from her face. The cold, aristocratic sneer vanishes completely. In its place, a frantic, desperate, and entirely fabricated warmth floods her features. She forces the corners of her mouth upward into a frantic, trembling smile. She takes a cautious step toward me, holding her hands out with her palms facing upward in a gesture of complete submission. Her voice when she speaks is totally stripped of its usual venom. It is soft pleading and dripping with a sickening manufactured affection. Zuri, sweetie, this is just a misunderstanding. We are family. We keep wealth in the family. Corinne's desperate saccharine smile hangs in the air, a grotesque mask plastered over her absolute panic. She keeps her hands extended, offering a poisoned olive branch, entirely convinced she can still manipulate her way out of the abyss. She truly believes that invoking the sacred concept of family will instantly erase the fact that she just handed me a fraudulent lease to force me out of my own home. I do not blink. I do not waver. I reach to the very back of the leather portfolio and slide out a single crisp sheet of heavy white paper. I place it directly on top of the commercial credit rejection, sliding it across the mahogany table until it rests exactly between Corinne and her weeping son. We were family, I correct her, my voice slicing through the heavy atmosphere like a scythe. But right now you are trespassers. Corinne's hands slowly drop to her sides. She stares down at the stark, bold lettering at the top of the page. It is a formal notice to vacate. It is completely filled out, legally binding, and pre-signed in blue ink by my head property manager. I do not need to initiate a standard 30-day eviction process, I announce, projecting my voice so it reaches every corner of the dining room. You have never been on a lease. You have never paid a utility bill. You hold absolutely zero legal standing in this residence. Under state property laws, you are legally classified as unauthorized occupants. I step away from the table, giving them a wide, unforgiving berth. I point a perfectly manicured finger directly at the front door. You have exactly 10 minutes, I state, tapping the face of my watch. If you are still standing on my hardwood floors when that time expires, I will call the building security team and have you escorted through the lobby in handcuffs. The finality of the command strikes the room with concussive force. Chloe lets out a muffled sob, finally breaking under the sheer humiliation of the moment. She turns away, hiding her face, realizing she has completely tethered herself to a sinking ship. Terrence looks entirely paralyzed, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door, silently calculating the quickest route to escape the devastation. But it is Andre who completely shatters. The man I married, the supposed titan of industry, the impeccably dressed heir to the Spellman and Morehouse legacy, physically crumbles. His knees give out entirely. He drops straight down onto the Persian rug. The heavy thud of his body hitting the floor reverberates through the silence. Zuri, please, he begs, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic wail. Please do not do this. Do not throw me out. He crawls forward on his knees, his expensive tailored trousers dragging against the rug. He reaches out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of my skirt. I take a swift, disgusted step backward, refusing to let him touch me. He collapses forward, planting his hands on the floor, weeping with loud, jagged, heaving sobs. Corinne looks down at her eldest son with an expression of pure, unfiltered revulsion. "Get up, Andre," she snaps, her voice hissing like a coiled snake. "Have some dignity. Stop groveling on the floor like a peasant." Andre completely ignores her. The facade has broken, and all the suppressed terror and inadequacy he has been hiding for years comes flooding out in a torrent of pathetic confessions. "You do not understand," he cries, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "You do not know what it is like to be her son. You do not know the pressure." She demanded perfection, Zuri. She demanded that we maintain the image of the firm, no matter what it cost. When the accounts started running dry, she told me it was my responsibility to fix it. She told me I was the oldest the heir, and I had to find the money to save the legacy. He points a shaking accusatory finger up at his mother. "She bled me dry," he screams, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "She took every commission I ever made to pay the firm's creditors. And when that was not enough, she told me to use the household accounts. She told me you made enough money that you would never notice it was gone. She told me a real wife would consider it a privilege to support the Spellman name." Corinne's face contorts with sudden, violent rage. "You weak, pathetic fool," she spits, taking a step away from him as if his failure is contagious. "Do not you dare blame me for your inability to generate capital. You were supposed to be a leader. You were supposed to be a man. I did it for you." Andre wails, completely, entirely broken. "I lied to her for you." He turns back to me, clasping his hands together in a posture of desperate prayer. "Zuri, I love you," he pleads, tears streaming down his cheeks, pooling in the collar of his custom shirt. "I never wanted to steal from you. I was just so terrified of failing. I was so terrified of being the one who let the family dynasty die. The pressure broke me. Please, baby, I am so sorry. Just give me a second chance. I will change. I will cut them off. We can start over. Just you and me. Please do not throw me away." I stand perfectly still, looking down at the man kneeling on my floor. I do not feel anger anymore. I do not feel betrayal. I feel an overwhelming, profound sense of emptiness. I look at him and realize I do not recognize the person begging at my feet. I am looking at a stranger. He is not a partner. He is not a husband. He is a hollow shell, an empty vessel molded entirely by his mother's toxic ambition and crippled by his own profound cowardice. He has absolutely no core, no spine, and no moral center. He sold out his marriage, his integrity, and his self-respect just to maintain an illusion that was already dead. He is still crying, still babbling pathetic apologies, promising me the moon and the stars, if I will just let him stay in the warmth of my penthouse. I tilt my head, looking at him with the cold, detached observation of a scientist examining a useless specimen. I feel absolutely nothing for him. The love I once held for this man has been completely incinerated by the bright, harsh light of the truth. I look past him, making brief eye contact with Corinne, who is staring at her son with absolute disgust, and then with Chloe and Terrence, who are already edging their way toward the grand entryway, eager to escape the blast zone. I look back down at Andre. "Your 10 minutes started 2 minutes ago," I tell him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Andre lets out a fresh, pathetic sob, burying his face in his hands. He does not move to stand up. He simply remains crumpled on my rug, waiting for someone else to fix the disaster he created. But there is no one left to fix it. Corinne's manufactured syrupy smile finally dissolves. The desperate warmth she tried to project slides right off her face, replaced by a cold, rigid mask of absolute fury. She realizes that her charm is completely useless here. I am not susceptible to her manipulation. I own the building. I own the leverage, and I am entirely immune to the Spellman name. She presses her lips together, her jaw tight, but she remains silent. She has run out of ammunition. It is Chloe who decides to fill the vacuum. Throughout this entire ordeal, Chloe has been hovering in the background, a silent spectator to her husband's humiliation and her mother-in-law's defeat. She is a woman who has never been told no in her entire life. She was born into wealth, married into what she believed was a dynasty, and operates with a deeply ingrained, unshakable sense of privilege. The concept of being ordered out of a room by someone she deems her social inferior is completely incomprehensible to her. She cannot accept the defeat. Her ego simply will not allow it. Chloe steps out from behind Terrence. Her posture is rigid, her chin tilted upward in a practiced display of indignation. She reaches into her expensive designer handbag and pulls out her phone, gripping it tightly. Her knuckles are white. "This is completely unacceptable," Chloe announces, her voice vibrating with a high-pitched, self-righteous anger. "You cannot treat us like this, Zuri. I do not care what pieces of paper you have on that table. You are acting completely unhinged." I turn my head slowly, transferring my gaze from the weeping man on the floor to my sister-in-law. I do not say a word. I simply let her speak, giving her enough rope to hang herself. "You are harassing us," Chloe continues, her volume rising as she attempts to seize control of the narrative. She holds her phone up, waving the dark screen in my direction like a shield. "You are being incredibly aggressive, and frankly, I feel physically threatened by your behavior right now." The audacity is almost breathtaking. It is a classic, predictable tactic. When confronted with irrefutable facts, when stripped of their unearned superiority, people like Chloe immediately retreat into the role of the victim. She is actively trying to weaponize her tears and her privilege, hoping the mere threat of authority will force me to back down and apologize for making her uncomfortable. She expects me to panic. She expects me to desperately try to de-escalate the situation, to assure her that I mean no harm, to suddenly remember my supposed place. I do not flinch. I do not offer a single word of reassurance. Instead, I reach into the pocket of my tailored trousers. I pull out my own phone. The sleek metal feels cold and heavy in my palm. I unlock the screen with a swipe of my thumb. I do not break eye contact with Chloe for a fraction of a second. The room is dead silent, save for Andre's ragged breathing. I press the number 9, then the number 1, then the number 1 again. I tap the bright green call button. I press the speaker icon. The loud, rhythmic ringing of the emergency line echoes through the vast, open space of the penthouse. 1 ring, 2 rings. Chloe's self-righteous expression falters. The color begins to drain rapidly from her perfectly made-up face. She lowers her phone slightly, her eyes wide, staring at the device in my hand, as if it is a live explosive. I take 2 deliberate steps forward, closing the distance between us. I hold my phone out, offering it directly to her. Here I say, my voice a deadly calm command that slices through the ringing tone. "Tell the dispatcher that a group of people are attempting to squat in my multi-million-dollar penthouse and refusing to leave." The 3rd ring cuts off abruptly. A sharp, clear voice fills the dining room. 911, what is your emergency?" The sound of the dispatcher's voice hits Chloe like a physical blow. Her bluff has been entirely spectacularly called. The reality of the situation crashes down on her all at once. She is not the victim in a misunderstanding. She is an unauthorized trespasser standing inside a $45 million commercial property owned by a woman who is absolutely willing to have her arrested. If she takes the phone, she will have to explain why she's refusing to leave a private residence. She will have to give her name. She will be humiliated in front of responding officers, dragged out of a luxury high-rise, and subjected to a public scandal that her country club friends would feast on for years. The Spellman bankruptcy is bad enough. A criminal trespassing charge would ruin her completely. Chloe stares at my phone, her mouth slightly open, completely paralyzed by fear. "Ma'am, what is your emergency?" The dispatcher repeats through the speaker, their voice professional and demanding. I look right into Chloe's terrified eyes. "Well," I ask softly, "are you going to report me, Chloe? Or are you going to leave my property?" She breaks. The ingrained arrogance shatters, leaving behind only a frantic, desperate urge to escape the consequences of her actions. Chloe aggressively snatches her hand back, treating my phone like it is covered in poison. She spins around on her expensive heels. She lunges toward the nearest chair and snatches up her heavy cashmere coat, nearly knocking the chair over in her frantic haste. She does not look at Corinne. She does not look at Andre. She does not even look at her own husband. She power walks directly toward the private elevator foyer, her footsteps echoing sharply against the hardwood floor. She jams her finger repeatedly against the call button, her chest heaving with panicked, humiliated breaths. Terrence stands in the dining room for 1 second longer. He looks at his mother, who is staring blankly at the floor. He looks at his brother, who is still weeping on the rug. He looks at the heavy blue packet of financial ruin sitting on the mahogany table. He has absolutely nothing left to say. His entire world has been dismantled in less than an hour. Terrence lowers his head. He turns away from his family, his shoulders slumped in absolute crushing defeat, and trails behind his wife in complete, humiliated silence. I keep the phone in my hand. I tap the screen, taking it off the speaker function, and bring the device to my ear. Yes, I apologize for the delay, I say to the dispatcher, my voice perfectly smooth and professional. I am the owner of the Apex Tower. I had a minor issue with some unauthorized individuals in my private residence, but they are currently vacating the premises. No police presence is required at this time. Thank you. I end the call. I slip the phone back into my pocket. The soft chime of the private elevator arriving echoes through the foyer. The heavy steel doors slide open. I watch as Chloe and Terrence step inside. They do not turn around. They do not look back. The doors slide shut, sealing them inside the steel box, physically removing them from my empire. 2 down, 2 to go. I turn my attention back to the dining area. Corinne is still standing completely still, looking like a statue that has been cracked down the middle. Andre is still on his knees, his forehead practically resting on the floor. The clock is ticking, and my patience has officially run out. Andre stares at me for one long, agonizing second. He is searching my eyes for a flicker of hesitation, a shred of the woman who used to look at him with adoration. He finds absolutely nothing. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. The tears instantly stop working. Pure, unadulterated panic takes over. He scrambles backward on his hands and knees, his polished leather shoes slipping frantically against the hardwood floor, until he manages to heave himself up. He grabs his custom wool coat from the back of the dining chair, nearly knocking the heavy piece of furniture over in his desperate haste. He does not say another word. He practically sprints toward the foyer, throwing himself into the open elevator car and pressing his body into the far back corner, completely surrendering his dignity. Corinne is the last one left standing in my dining room. She watches her eldest son cower in the corner of the elevator like a beaten animal. Her chest rises and falls with rapid, shallow breaths. The complete destruction of her family's financial secrecy has stripped her of everything, yet her ego simply will not allow her to walk out of my home in silence. She refuses to accept the reality that a woman she viewed as completely beneath her has just dismantled her entire dynasty. Corinne straightens her spine, forcing her shoulders back. She grips her designer handbag like a shield and walks toward the foyer with slow, deliberate steps, attempting to salvage a final shred of her aristocratic pride. She steps into the elevator car standing in front of Andre, but she does not press the button to descend. Instead, she turns to face me. She holds the heavy steel door open with one heavily ringed hand. Her eyes narrow, burning with a toxic, desperate hatred. "You think you have won?" she hisses, her voice vibrating with venomous spite. "You think a few smart real estate investments make you untouchable? You are nothing but new money, Zuri. You have no class, no lineage, and no idea how the real world operates. You will regret making an enemy of me. I am going to make a few phone calls to the right people and your business will dry up overnight. Old money always wins in Atlanta. We have connections you cannot even fathom." I do not laugh. I do not raise my voice. I simply walk toward her. The sharp, rhythmic click of my heels against the floor echoes loudly in the tense silence of the penthouse. I do not stop until I am standing right at the threshold of the elevator, completely invading her personal space. I am so close I can smell the stale, heavy scent of her expensive perfume. Corinne instinctively stiffens her hand, gripping the elevator door tighter, but she refuses to step back. I tilt my head, looking down at her with an expression of pure clinical pity. Old money only wins when it actually has money. "Corinne," I say. my voice dropping to a deadly resonant whisper that guarantees she hears every single syllable. You do not have connections. You have creditors. You have a burning ship, and the rats are already jumping into the water. Your family's holding firm owes its major lenders by Monday morning. You do not even possess the capital to cover the interest payments, let alone the principal. Corinne's eyes widen. The false bravado she just tried to summon evaporates, instantly replaced by a raw, unmasked terror. She realizes that my forensic accountants did not just look at a lease application, they looked at everything. I let a sharp, terrifying smile spread across my face. Your banks are going to initiate the foreclosure process before the end of the week, I tell her, delivering the final fatal blow. They are going to seize your commercial assets, liquidate your portfolios, and auction off every single property the Spellman and Morehouse firm has mismanaged for the last decade. I know this because my development firm is already positioned to bid on them. I look forward to buying your foreclosed properties at auction for pennies on the dollar. Corinne's mouth opens, her jaw drops, but absolutely no sound comes out. Her lungs seem to have forgotten how to draw air. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of her defeat has paralyzed her vocal cords. I step back, reach out, and firmly pull her hand off the elevator door. Have a safe trip down to the lobby, I say. The heavy steel doors slide shut smoothly, closing directly on Corinne's pale, horrified face. The digital display above the frame blinks, indicating their rapid descent down to the street level. The penthouse falls into a deep, beautiful, and completely undisturbed silence. The air feels lighter. The parasitic weight that had been quietly draining my energy for the past 2 years has been completely excised. The ensuing weeks are a masterclass in swift, unforgiving legal execution. I do not waste a single second mourning a marriage that was built entirely on a foundation of fraud. The very next morning, I walk into the offices of the most ruthless litigation firm in Atlanta. I do not just file for a standard divorce. I file for a complete legal annulment based on deliberate, calculated financial deception. I hand my lead attorney the stack of bank statements, the routing account details, and the commercial credit rejection forms. The paper trail is flawless, legally binding, and utterly devastating. Andre, completely delusional and clinging to his mother's terrible advice, attempts to fight back. He hires a discount attorney using heavily maxed out credit cards and files a ridiculous counter-petition demanding spousal support. He claims that he has grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle during our marriage and argues that he is entitled to a portion of the equity in the penthouse and a percentage of the profits from my staging business. His audacity is almost comical, but it is swiftly and brutally crushed during our first mandatory mediation session. We sit across from each other in a sterile, glass-walled conference room. Andre looks terrible. He has lost weight, his skin is sallow, and he is wearing an off-the-rack suit that fits him poorly. The glossy, confident executive I married is completely gone. He refuses to make eye contact with me, staring instead at his legal pad, while his cheap attorney stammers through a prepared statement about equitable distribution of marital assets. My lead attorney does not even bother to argue. She simply opens a thick binder and begins sliding documents across the polished table. She lays out the articles of incorporation for West End Holdings, LLC, proving unequivocally that the entity was formed entirely prior to the marriage. She lays out the property deeds, all strictly held under the corporate veil of my premarital holding company. She then slides over the financial tracing reports, showing exactly how Andre siphoned his own income into his mother's failing business, while completely abandoning his legal obligation to contribute to our joint household expenses. Because I meticulously protected my assets through isolated corporate structures, and because we possess documented, irrefutable proof of his active financial deception, the mediator takes exactly 15 minutes to dismantle his entire case. Andre gets absolutely nothing. There is no settlement. There is no alimony. There is no payout. He is ordered to vacate all claims and is left holding nothing but his own massive compounding credit card debt. He walks out of the mediation room with a negative net worth, officially carrying the financial ruin of his family entirely on his own shoulders. 2 weeks later, I am sitting in the plush leather chair of my commercial real estate attorney's office. The skyline of downtown Atlanta stretches out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, bright and full of endless opportunity. Spread out on the desk in front of me is a massive stack of acquisition contracts. Corinne's lenders did exactly what my team predicted. They seized the Spellman and Morehouse assets and immediately moved to liquidate the portfolio to recover their losses. My firm moved in quietly, anonymously, and aggressively. We bypassed the public auction, entirely negotiating directly with the holding banks to purchase the premium commercial lots in an expedited cash transaction. I pick up a heavy gold-plated pen and sign my name on the final line of the master transfer agreement. The Spellman legacy is officially dead, and its most valuable assets now belong entirely to West End Holdings. My phone resting on the edge of the desk vibrates. The screen lights up, displaying a number I deleted weeks ago. It is Andre. He is calling me. I know exactly what he wants. He wants to apologize again. He wants to beg for financial help. He wants to see if there is any shred of the woman who used to blindly fund his illusions left to exploit. I do not feel a single twinge of pity. I pick up the phone, press the red icon to reject the call, and immediately block the number. I set the phone face down, hand the signed contracts back to my attorney, and walk out of the office to inspect my newly acquired properties. The morning air in Atlanta is crisp, carrying the faint hum of a city waking up to generate wealth. I stand on the sprawling terrace of my penthouse, both hands wrapped around a warm porcelain mug of dark roast coffee. The skyline stretches out before me, a jagged horizon of glass and steel, catching the early sunlight. A year has passed since the day I threw my husband and his family out of this exact residence. 365 days of uninterrupted peace, aggressive expansion, and absolute vindication. I step away from the railing and walk over to the sleek glass patio table. Resting precisely in the center is the latest issue of the city's premier business magazine. I look down at the glossy cover. My own face looks back at me. I am wearing a tailored emerald suit, standing in the lobby of a high-rise, looking directly into the camera with an expression of unwavering authority. The bold white text beneath my photograph reads, "The New Titan of Atlanta Real Estate: How West End Holdings Redefined the Commercial Landscape." The feature article spans 10 pages. It details my firm's explosive growth over the last 4 quarters. It highlights our innovative approach to commercial staging and acquisition. But the centerpiece of the profile, the anchor of the entire narrative, is the masterful absorption of the Spellman and Morehouse portfolio. The journalists called it a ruthless, brilliant execution of corporate strategy. They detailed how a legacy firm bloated by decades of mismanagement and arrogance was systematically dismantled and bought for parts by a newer, smarter, and infinitely more disciplined entity. There is no mention of my brief marriage to Andre. There is no mention of Corinne. To the business world, they are not victims of a personal vendetta. They are simply an outdated business model that failed to survive in a competitive market. I did not just defeat them, I erased their relevance entirely. I take a slow sip of my coffee, letting the rich, bitter taste coat my tongue. The silence of the penthouse is a luxury I will never again take for granted. Far below this balcony, in a decaying, heavily mortgaged mansion on the outskirts of Buckhead, the reality of the Spellman legacy has settled into a grim, inescapable nightmare. The network of high society friends Corinne threatened me with completely evaporated the moment the bank seized her commercial assets. In her world, poverty is the ultimate social contagion, and no one wanted to catch it. Her country club memberships were quietly revoked for non-payment. Her invitations to charity galas stopped arriving. The polite society she wielded like a weapon simply closed its doors and pretended she no longer existed. To avoid total foreclosure on her primary residence, Corinne was forced into the ultimate humiliation. The woman who once sneered at the working class, who demanded I fund her illusions of grandeur because she deemed me socially inferior, is now a landlord. She converted the sprawling wings of her historic mansion into individual rental units. She spends her days dealing with tenants, collecting late rent checks, and managing plumbing repairs she can barely afford. She is trapped in the hollow shell of her former glory, forced to smile at strangers walking through her pristine hallways just to generate enough cash flow to keep the lights on. The aristocratic pride she clung to has been ground into dust by the relentless machinery of survival. And then there is Andre. When the dust settled and my lawyers finished stripping away every baseless claim he made during the annulment, Andre had nowhere else to go. His credit was obliterated. His professional reputation was collateral damage in the firm's spectacular collapse. No reputable brokerage in the city would hire a man whose name was synonymous with financial fraud and gross incompetence. He moved back into his childhood bedroom down the hall from Corinne's rental units. He is 36 years old, sleeping in a room decorated with high school sports trophies, surrounded by the physical artifacts of a time when he was still considered promising. He has no assets, no wife to siphon funds from, and no mother capable of bailing him out. He is completely paralyzed by the reality of his own mediocrity. He wanted to play the role of the traditional patriarch, yet he lacked the spine to build anything of his own. He is permanently relegated to the status of a dependent boy. Chloe and Terrence fled to the suburbs shortly after the auction. Terrence accepted a mid-level management position at a logistics company, a job his mother would have previously forbidden him from taking. Chloe was forced to sell her designer handbags online to cover the down payment on a modest, unremarkable tract home. They live a quiet, severely budgeted life, utterly disconnected from the Spellman dynasty they once thought would guarantee their elite status forever. I set my coffee mug down next to the magazine. I trace my finger over the glossy cover, feeling the smooth paper beneath my skin. I think back to that afternoon in my dining room. I remember the absolute conviction in Corinne's eyes when she demanded I respect her authority. I remember Andre begging on his knees, expecting me to sacrifice my security to save him from his own cowardice. They walked into my home entirely convinced that their lineage entitled them to my hard work. They demanded I pay for my space, entirely blind to the fact that I was the one who built the ground they were standing on. I pick up my mug and look out over the city I am steadily conquering. I take a sip of my coffee. Success, it turns out, is the sweetest revenge. The most profound lesson here is that true family is defined by mutual respect, not bloodlines. When toxic dynamics and blatant betrayals threaten your well-being, your strongest defense is complete independence. You never have to endure mistreatment just to keep the peace. Building your own success, setting firm boundaries, and walking away from those who constantly undermine your worth is not a failure. It is your ultimate victory. True validation comes from within, not from those blind to your value. Have you ever walked away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below and subscribe.